Welcome everyone to the HLF Online. Welcome KATHRYN GAUCI and all the friends who have logged in now to the online conversation. I speak here on behalf of my colleagues from the Hyderabad Literary Festival and the team, as well as the colleagues from the Goethe Centrum Hyderabad. I'm extremely happy that we have with us, logged in all the way from Australia, KATHRYN with us to talk about her best-selling novel, The Secret of the Grand Hotel du Lac. The format of this particular session is that we will talk about it with KATHRYN. We will have some readings and of course some question and answers. You may please note them on the chat on the platform that you're on. And well, yes, here we are, completely thrilled. Burning the midnight oil, literally, KATHRYN. It must be past midnight for you in Australia, in Melbourne, where you are at this moment. And I must say that while we are not face to face, I am thankful to the technology of today that we can have you with us for this session. So it's wonderful to have you here. A few words about KATHRYN. KATHRYN GAUCI was born in England and she has studied textile design and carpet design and technology. After graduating, she spent a year in Vienna in Austria before moving to Greece, where she worked as a carpet designer in Athens for 6 years. She then went on for a brief period to New Zealand before eventually settling in Melbourne, Australia. Prior to turning to full-time writing, KATHRYN ran her own textile design studio in Melbourne for over 15 years, work which she enjoyed tremendously as it allowed her the luxury of traveling worldwide, often taking her off the beaten track and exploring other cultures. Her first novel, The Embroiderer, is a culmination of those wonderful years of design and travel, and especially those glorious years in her youth, living and working in Greece, which she calls a place of her spiritual home, proud to call it her spiritual home. In fact, her book has also been translated into Greek. KATHRYN has more than 8 titles to her credit and many more in the pipeline. They're ready to be launched very soon. KATHRYN, tell us about your journey, from a textile and a carpet designer to a designer of words. How did this transition happen?
Well, first, let me say thank you, Amita, for inviting me to your literary festival. I'm really honored to be here with you. It's great to be able to talk with you. Thank you. How to start off this long journey. When I first started my career as a designer, I never thought at the time that I would end up writing. I really enjoyed my life as a textile designer. And I was very happy with this because it allowed me to travel. It was really creative and very interesting. But as the years went on, there were two things. I began to get a bit jaded, I think, after so long in the industry. And also the textile world was changing. So it was a gradual move I wanted to do something creative. And then I decided that I'd really like to write. So I hadn't thought about it until probably 2 years before I ended up giving up the studio. And one of the things that made me look to writing was when I had my design studio. For the latter years, I used to do trend presentations for my clients. And when you do this, it involves being able to create mood boards for the upcoming year. And those mood boards could be anything for, it was the upcoming fashions. And those mood boards could be anything from the Renaissance to Rococo to English manor house, Scandinavian winters, and ethnic. And when you're creating these mood boards, you have to be able to transport the customer into that, into the era and the and put them in that space that you're describing. So you have to be able to talk about the colors and generally envelop them in that mood. And I found that I really enjoyed doing that, because they used to say to me afterwards, you know, we really felt we were there. You were able to transport us into that journey. And I don't know, it's something sort of tweaked in me. And I thought, well, I think I might be able to carry this further into a literary world. And plus, then it still gave me chance to be creative and to bring in my love of history and travel.
Well, we can see that because you know, your detail for, say, dishes that are cooked, or the way the table is set, or the colors of the clothing, the ambience, the decor, or where people are seated, and the entire weaving of the environment and the story and the narrative has been so intricate. And I mean, it has to come from somebody who is a designer, because it's very, very craftily done. And I noticed that as I was reading, and by the way, Kathryn, I am a slow reader, but your 329 pages I managed in no time. And I said, whoa, I have never done this before, because you just transpose the reader in the thick of the narrative. And the narrative, of course, is not light. There's a lot happening. And we're talking about your bestseller book, The Secret of the Grand Hotel du Lac, which is about the war. So you interweave the reader into the narrative on the one hand, but give out these fabulous details on the other. How did this particular book happen to you? How is it that you are so involved in war stories? A lot of your work is on World War and other wars. So tell us a little bit about that.
I've always been interested in war. I think it's part of it was growing up after the war, when you know, there were films around like Casablanca and The Third Man, and you heard the music of Glenn Miller and the big band era. And so that stayed with me as I was growing up. I didn't really think about the war at that point. But then when I went to Vienna, at the time in the early 70s, Vienna had only just been about 10 years of being back to an independent country again, because prior to that, it had the Allied forces there. And the factory that I worked at was in the Russian sector. So they started to tell me about what they had experienced during the war. And I saw the Austrian side of it. And also the mood of Vienna at the time was very much like The Third Man. I don't know if you know that film, but yes, there was a feeling of film noir. I love film noir that's great for this sort of thing. It's, you know, the shadows, and it just, you know, soaks me in. So that really stayed with me. But even then, I still didn't think I would ever be writing. And then when I went to Greece, well, I couldn't get away. I couldn't escape war, because the Greeks, as you know, in their modern history, have gone through so many wars and revolutions that it was all around me. Right. And when I then did, and even then I didn't think that I would write, but it was all, I was still soaking it up. And when I did decide to write, my first book was set in Greece and Turkey. And although it started with the fall of the Ottoman Empire, it ended with the Second World War in Athens, because I'd experienced both sides of it. And then it just grew. Yeah. So, and it's a genre that I really like. When you're writing about war, it's so expansive that it's very good for a writer, because you can have light and shade and bring characters out. There's so much there for the plot line as well as the facts. And I think also we don't want people to forget what happened.
Yes. Yes, totally. I mean, I think that's a wonderful thing. We don't want people to forget, and your writing is classified as historical fiction.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, because yes, we don't want people to forget, and we want people to read, because people don't just pick up a book of history and read, but such books as yours takes one closer to what has been, and then there's a narrative, then there is a storyline, there are characters that come alive. So tell us a bit about the genre that you've chosen to write in.
Well, I'm not an historian, and I think that an historian approaches history from a completely different aspect. But when you're writing historical fiction, you have to do your research, and you have to be as accurate as you can. So it not only involves studying the history, as an historian would do, but part of bringing the fiction in is that you can be creative with it. Such as you say, talking about the food and bringing in the clothes and making a plot and bringing a plot. You're really telling a story. So the fiction is really bringing in the emotions that probably an historian wouldn't be able to do. They're not looking at that. So we're trying to envelop the person and make them a part of that journey. And you do that by touching the senses, I think. Right. Making it colorful. But you you cannot escape. You must get the facts right.
So how did you do that? How did you research out the facts and the stories? Because this is based on something that you have read and followed very carefully. You may have traveled. How do you make it so close to the reality? Did you do a lot of traveling and research for this?
Are you talking in general or just about this latest book?
Both, but I mean this particular book. Let's talk about The Secret of the Grand Hotel.
The story came about by accident. I had just over a year ago, I had the opportunity to go and stay for 2.5 months in the Jura region, Franche-Comté Jura region of France. Now, it was a region, I've been to France quite a few times, and it's a region I didn't know. So I thought that I would go and research the resistance and anything to do with the war. But it was really like a blank canvas because I had no idea at all what I would find. So I went with an open mind. The only thing I knew was that where I was going to stay in a residence by the lake of Lake Bonlieu was that I was 15 kilometers away from where the dividing line had been between the occupied and non-occupied zone and the free zone. So I was right in the corner of a very interesting part of the early of the division that the Germans had made, and but and there were two things that I knew at the time, and these were by accident. The person whose house I stayed at was interested in war, war stories, and she told me that the original hotel, the original residence had been a hotel, but the original hotel, Du Lac, had been burnt down by the Gestapo, and that's all she knew. And it sort of fired my imagination, and I thought, wow, you know, this. But I still didn't know how I was going to pull the story together. It was just a fact at that point, which I just felt was fascinating. And the other thing was on the dividing line in the town of Saint-Laurent-en-Grandvaux, which was my nearest shopping town, was the train line that ran through it was the actual dividing line. And the man who had the taxi service at the time, and still his family still has that taxi service, because of the division, they had to start another business. And even today, you can see the two houses by the station. One where he lives and one where the office is now. So they had to create the two businesses because there was, you know, it was an impasse, they couldn't get through. But I also got to realize that these people who were able to cross the border were actually also helping people pass over, pass through. So that's about all I knew at the time. And then when I got there, it just exploded. I couldn't believe. In fact, when I got there, I was actually writing another book, but I had to put that away because I was surrounded by so much information, and I just noted it all down. And there was still a lot of things that were hard to find. For instance, I kept finding these monuments at the side of the road everywhere. And we're talking here about a countryside that is serene and beautiful. It's a picturesque countryside, full of lakes, fields, and then on the other side you've got the Alpine region going into the mountains towards Switzerland. I was only half an hour away from the Swiss border. So you've got all these different landscape, but it's peaceful and it's beautiful. Yet everywhere I went, I would see a monument at the side of the road or in the woods, because a lot of the time I was alone, so I was able to explore. And I kept taking photographs. I would have had at least 50 photographs of these monuments. And when I looked at them, I found they were saying a monument to someone who had been executed by the Germans. And it showed you the age. And in many cases, the age could have been 20, between 20 and 30, very young age. So this began to sink in. And there was also a period that it was happening, and that was really in the first 6 months of 1944. So I'm thinking, all these young people executed here, there, and everywhere at the side of the road, and in a copse somewhere. And at this time, what was going on? And I had to do more research, and it wasn't easy to find the research, but there were some books that I found in French, and my French is school French. So I had to come back. When I left, I came back, and I was able to translate and find out exactly why it happened when it did.
So maybe KATHRYN, gosh, I'm so two things here. One is that maybe we should tell our listeners the story, a quick few lines about when the story happens and where it happens. Of course, we're talking about France, the occupied France, versus being very close to the Swiss border. You talked about the Passeurs. Let's come back to that. But let's have it in your words. What the story is about, the secret of the Grand Hotel du Lac.
Well, there is a network run by Guy Maxwell, and Guy has gone missing. He's the head of the Belvedere network, and he's gone missing. And his wife, who was with him in Elizabeth, who was with him on an earlier assignment in France, was in England, and she was called to a Baker Street, to the Special Operations SOE, the Special Operations Executive, the headquarters there, the French F section, and she thinks that she's going to hear something about her husband, that he's coming back. But Vera Atkins and Maurice Buckmaster, who ran F section, told her that something has gone wrong, and they think that the network has been broken, because at the time, quite a few networks had been infiltrated by the Germans. And F section were never quite sure whether it was true. So a lot of agents were being parachuted to their deaths. So they knew that she was a capable woman, and they wanted her to go in alone. And as she knew how her husband operated, and find out what had happened to him and what had happened to the Belvedere network. So she is dropped into occupied France, and this time she's working alone, and she is given her own radio. So she has to be very careful that who she contacts again, because she doesn't know if the earlier agents, resistance that she knew are part of the intrigue. So she's got to be very careful as she's going along. And it's really about her trying to find out what happened to Guy, and in the end find out who betrayed the network. And that takes her on a lot of journeys. And then, of course, she discovers the Grand Hotel du Lac is a part of this network that she accidentally falls upon, and what the people who own the hotel have been doing. So it explodes from there. But it's quite a harrowing journey. Because when I write a story, I like to do a lot of twists and turns.
Oh, constantly. Yeah. We are at our, it's such a suspense, and it's such a breathtaking reading that really turn page after page to just quickly know what is coming next, along with a whole lot of minute, not only details about the environment, but you really begin to feel the individual characters. And They become part of you. You feel you're part in the midst of all the people that are there. Lisette is there, but also the families that she's with, her giving birth to this child because there was no other way, and she has the experience of being a nurse, and all of those minute details do come out. So tell me, did the story happen to you when you went to this beautiful place, or it happened to you and then it filled up as you were there because you researched and followed up?
Yeah, I knew that the hotel would play an important part, but I didn't exactly know how it would come together until I was about to leave. There was another important point about this hotel that happened. I must say this because this was a bit of a crunch point for the story. The friend whose house that I stayed at, just before I went, she said 2 men were walking along the front near the lake, and she said to them, "Do you realize you're trespassing?" And one of the men that was French, and the other was from a Dutch family. And the man said to her, "Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't realize. My grandmother used to own the hotel that was here. And when I was 5, she told me that they helped the people to escape through to Switzerland, through the forest, and that there was this, a secret entrance, a secret pass into the forest." And he was looking for it. He was 5, and she had told him where, but he didn't remember. All these years later, he didn't remember. And the man that was with him, his father, I think it was his father, was Dutch and had been part of the escapees that the grandmother had helped. So when the Gestapo burnt down the original Hotel du Lac, which was actually nearer to the escarpment, about a quarter of a kilometer away, of course, it obviously must have collapsed, and whatever escape route was there was buried with it. So that's fired my imagination up, and I worked on that escape route.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Wow. I mean, that the 2 gentlemen who you met had such close connect to the place and the happenings there during the 1944, just prior to the end of the war, the Second World Wars.
Well,
that's amazing.
When my friend knew that I'd finished the book, she actually got in contact. They had their emails, and she got in contact with this man, and he now runs, he has a winery in the Chablais region. And she said, "Oh, my friend's written a book about your grandmother's hotel." So he bought the book, and I'm thinking, well, I hope he thinks that I've done his grandmother justice. But it wasn't just his grandmother. I have to say that when you're standing, there was something about this book that really got to me, because when you are standing in front of all those monuments, as I said, to young people who have lost their life just because they didn't want to be sent to Germany for the labor force, and things like this, or the Jews, or escaping. You know, when you're actually seeing that they were shot, you're standing there where they were shot, you really want to do them justice. So you can't be flippant about it. It's got to be, right, you're telling, in the end, you're telling a story. But, you know, it sort of choked you up a bit, and you want to honor their memory. So you have to be very careful.
That's right. That's right. No, you're very right. I mean, in fact, it's an interesting thing that the book is on the bestsellers Kindle list in Germany. So while this is about the occupied France, about the World War, and about the Germans coming in, um, it is still a history that has happened, and a history that cannot be forgotten, and
Yeah,
stories that need to be told and retold and reminisced, so that we hope that such catastrophe of this magnitude does not repeat itself. And these are very essential reads, and very essential. Would you read something out from the book, something that will transpose our readers, listeners, to the hotel?
all right. Um, well, the part that I've chosen is where Elizabeth, it's about halfway through the book, and Elizabeth thinks someone's following her. A woman is following her. And so she is trying to find this woman. And she ends up in the countryside, in the middle of nowhere. It's nothing around except the forests. And there's a sign that says to Lake Beaulieu. And she's been dropped off. She goes by bus, and she's been dropped off. She's got 2 hours before she goes back. So she decides to take a walk towards the lake. So, it was not the beautiful lake that made her stop in her tracks, but the hotel. It was completely unexpected. Set against the dramatic backdrop of the cliff face in a garden of undulating lawns interspersed with rose bushes and hydrangeas, it was a blend of Jura farmstead and elegant Franche-Comté city elegance. The building appeared to have 3 stories and was long rather than tall, with a steep sloping roof, ideal for winter snowfalls. Several of the first floor windows opened up onto narrow balconies just wide enough to accommodate a small table and 2 chairs, and the entire facade was painted a warm butter yellow with shutters in a faded red rose. In the bright afternoon sun, it had an old world charm to it. The name of the hotel also bore an element of grandeur, the Grand Hotel du Lac. For a hotel in the middle of nowhere, it certainly lived up to its name. She decided to take a closer look, but suddenly stopped in her tracks. The front of the hotel had a wide terrace with a view of the lake, and on the terrace several people were dining under the shade of yellow umbrellas. She recognized several of the uniforms, Wehrmacht officers. In an instant, the elation turned to dread. A car approached her from behind, and she stood aside to let it pass. It was an open-top Mercedes, and in it was a smartly dressed, uniformed man accompanied by a glamorous blonde woman who looked like a film star. The woman lowered her sunglasses as the car passed, caught Elizabeth's eye, and smiled. Elizabeth was too stunned to return the smile. The car drove past the terrace and parked next to several other smart cars. Elizabeth squeezed the cream handkerchief tightly. Inadvertently, she had entered the lion's den, and unless she wanted to draw attention to herself, she had no option but to go on. Taking a deep breath, she boldly walked towards the terrace and into the hotel. The woman behind the reception desk eyed Elizabeth excuse me, over the top of her glasses. "How can I help you?" she asked. "If it's a room you're after, I'm afraid we're fully booked at the moment." Elizabeth explained that she was taking a stroll by the lake and only wanted to dine there. In that case, please take a seat over there and someone will attend to you as soon as possible. She pointed towards a lounge filled with leather-bound chairs and velvet couches, interspersed with potted palms in decorative jardinières. Elizabeth took a seat, picked up a French edition of Signal magazine lying on a coffee table, and flicked through it while quietly taking in her surroundings. On one wall was a large propaganda poster put out by the Vichy regime, telling people to spend their holidays in the country. From where she sat, she had a view of the terrace through the open French doors and a clear view of the lake in the distance, with several people strolling about along the bank as if they hadn't a care in the world. Clearly, some people took notice of such posters, choosing to think life went on as normal. A smartly attired waiter moved about from table to table with the adroitness of the best Parisian waiters, serving the finest wines, coffees, and cigars. Every now and again, peals of laughter drifted into the room. The receptionist came over with a glass of fresh lemonade on a silver tray, placed it on the table in front of her with a serviette. She handed her a menu with the name of the hotel set in a gold frame, under which was the head of a stag, and asked if she would care to peruse it while waiting for her table. She scanned her eyes down the beautifully printed page, wondering what Monique would say to such delicacies de la table. Starters included trout puree in pastry shells, cheese ramekins, herb pie, and spring soup. Mains consisted of a variety of meats and fresh fish, with an assortment of seasonal vegetables, followed by mouth-watering desserts rarely seen on any bistro menu these days, torte di frangipane, and an assortment of marzipan, turnovers, macarons, and custards. As befitted a hotel of such elegance, there were no prices. Elizabeth knew it wouldn't be cheap and hoped she had enough money with her. This was not the place where ration cards would be required. The couple who had passed her in the car walked into the terrace and sat at a table which had obviously been reserved for them. Two Germans on the next table stood up and saluted the man. After 5 minutes, the maitre d' came over to inform her that her table was ready. Knowing that she would probably attract attention being a woman on her own, Elizabeth held her head high, feigning a confidence she wasn't too sure about. A French couple on the next table bade her a good day, and the maitre d' pulled out a chair for her. With a flourish, he flicked open a white napkin and dropped it into her lap, asking if he could get her a drink while she was deciding on the menu. She needed to keep her wits about her at all costs, and rather than anything alcoholic, ordered another lemonade. Elizabeth ordered the spring soup, followed by grilled trout. It was not uncommon anywhere in France for good hotels to be frequented by Germans, but there was something sinister about this place, and she couldn't put her finger on it. As often happened, one only needed to scratch away the veneer and dig a little deeper to see what was really going on. Lake Bonlieu was 15 kilometers from Saint-Laurent-en-Grandvaux, and until the whole of France was occupied, the train had been the dividing line between the occupied and non-occupied zones. Strategically, it was on the Route de Genève, the main road from Dijon, Champagnol, and through Meretz in the Forbidden Zone on the Swiss border. The Wehrmacht moved along this road at all times, radiating out into the countryside in the event of any problems caused by the resistance. It was also one of the main roads the Belvedere network intended to target leading up to the invasion of France. So Elizabeth could hardly be surprised by the presence of such a diverse group of high-powered Germans. The couple that attracted her attention the most was the one in the car. By the look of his insignia, he was an Obergruppenführer, a high-ranking general in the SS, or, as Guy used to tell her, a jumped-up stormtrooper. Whatever he was certainly good-looking. It was hard to tell, but Elizabeth thought he must be in his early 40s, tall, with blonde hair, a healthy tan complexion, and a good physique. His companion couldn't get enough of him. In looks, she was his equal, also tall, with wavy shoulder-length blonde hair, and from what Elizabeth could recall as she observed it in the car, grey-blue eyes. Interestingly, she also wore the same fashionable coloured lipstick that Elizabeth had received during the last drop. Vera Atkins had certainly done her homework. Every now and again, the woman stroked the man's hand whilst talking to him, a small flirtatious gesture that appeared to delight him enormously. She wore a cornflower blue dress with a low cowl neckline, and around her neck was a strand of pearls, which she twirled around her fingers playfully. Elizabeth noted that she also wore a wedding ring. After finishing the main course, she decided to forego one of the tempting desserts in order not to miss the bus back. She had no idea where the mystery woman in Clairvaux had gone, and it seemed pointless to hang around. The waiter presented the bill and asked if she could pay at the reception desk. As expected, the meal cost a small fortune. London would not look too kindly on her going on a wild goose chase and spending the equivalent of a French factory worker's weekly salary on a single meal. The same woman was still behind the reception desk and asked if she'd enjoyed her meal. Elizabeth asked to give her compliments to the chef. It was then that she took the handkerchief out of her bag. I found this as I was walking along the lane, she said. Someone must have dropped it. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have bothered to pick it up, except that it's particularly beautiful and probably cost quite a lot of money. It has hand-embroidered initials in the corner and may even have been a gift, in which case the owner would be distressed if she knew she'd lost it. She opened her hand to reveal the initials and a section of the lace. I wondered if perhaps she had a guest with such initials. The woman put on her glasses attached to a gold chain around her neck and took a long look. No, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Maybe the owner didn't come here. She could have gone to the lake. Not everyone calls in here, you know. Elizabeth sensed the woman did not want to continue being questioned and turned her attention to someone standing behind her, the blonde lady. So I won't go on because we start to give away things then.
Wow, that's quite a suspense. Who's this woman behind her? Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, you cover the menu, you cover the embroidery, you cover the ambience that it is middle of the war, and while there is this elaborate menu, there is a war, and there is this threat looming large. You mentioned earlier on, KATHRYN, thank you for that reading. That was beautiful. To hear the author read her own words is, I think, a very special experience. Thank you so much. You mentioned the passeurs, because you mentioned that the two gentlemen that you had met, one of them had the grandmother owned the hotel, and the other gentleman's family had been helped across the border.
Yeah.
What happens? Who are these passeurs? I mean, yeah, please.
The passeurs played a very important role in helping essentially they're the smugglers. And the area along the Swiss border was the forbidden zone. And you needed a special pass, or you needed to live there. It was not easy to get there at all. So the passeurs had relatives. They were either living in this forbidden zone, or they had relatives, or they were living on the other side of the border. And they knew the area so well that they had used it for smuggling tires or petrol, things that they just normally couldn't get. And naturally, they got asked to be able to, if they would help to the escapees go across the border. Now, there were, as happens in this people smuggling trade, there were a lot of people who were making a lot of money and just leaving the people that they said they were helping, putting them into the hands of the Germans and just taking their money. So it was not easy to find someone that you could trust. Mm-hmm. And I've followed, and what someone told me was an escape route, which was started out in La Pont on the other side, on the Swiss border, on the Lac de Joux. And that's about 20 kilometers on the other side from the French border. So I went through and I started from Le Pont and then followed I didn't actually follow the escape route. I was running parallel with it because there's a road there now. But I could see the terrain, that part of the terrain. They took a few areas, a few routes going through there. But it was very dangerous work because you just didn't get over the border into Switzerland, and that was it. Because on the other side of the border, there was a no man's land, which went for about at least 5 kilometers. So it was patrolled by Swiss soldiers. And if the soldiers found anyone that had managed to escape over the border, they would push them back over into the hands of the Germans. They wouldn't just leave them there. So it wasn't enough to be able to just get over there. You had to make sure that you were at least 15 kilometers away. And then, even then, you still needed to have families that would help protect you. Otherwise, you would go into an equivalent of an internment camp. And the passeurs were always looked on as rogues and classed as smugglers. And it wasn't until 2014 that they had an acclaimed status, and the monument was put up at Le Pont, which is in about 6 languages now, that really said that they were heroes and that they saved quite a few thousand people. So without them, many people would have met their deaths. And it was not an easy terrain at all. And the passeurs did not want to take old people, and they didn't want to take children, because if you can imagine trying to go through that sort of terrain, the mountainous terrain, with root formations and rocks, and you've got children crying. They had to drag the children. You know, with guards and someone waiting to get them. It was not an easy job. So, and also you've got the wild animals, because the wolves were there. So I have to say that walking around the lake and walking in the forest, I realized myself, and I wasn't even in the war, how hard it must have been for them. And I wanted to go out one night, and I was so scared. And the wolves later on came to my door. I didn't even know this was going to happen. And when I realized that I could have taken a walk alone in the dark and that the wolves were around, I was scared stiff. So, you know, my heart went out to those people who really took that journey. It's unimaginable.
Yeah. No, you do two things. One is your book, and you do dedicate this book to the bravery of men and women of the resistance and to the passeurs who smuggled hundreds of Jews and others across the border into Switzerland. So that's a very moving statement, KATHRYN, and a very, very relevant statement that these were people who saved thousands of lives. You do describe, and when Lisette, the protagonist of the story, when ultimately she acts as a passeur because there's nobody else who could do that, and these are the last days, and she and then there was this child, and I recall how tense I was reading those 50 pages. I recall. And this was, as you said, not even during wartime. I was snugly seated on my rocking chair and reading. It must have been quite an experience, and I cannot reiterate, as you have done it already. We cannot forget this. We cannot allow time to forget what has happened. This was reality. For many years, for many people, and many lives have been lost.
And there's another thing as well. I mean, there was the escape route into Switzerland, and then also we know of the Pyrenees, which was thousands went through the Pyrenees as well. But one reason it wasn't easy to get information was that there was I think there was almost like Germany suffered. There was a bit of a collective guilt in France after the war because of the collaboration of the Vichy regime. And I have to say, this was important to the book of why the Germans could not have operated in this region so efficiently if it had not been for the quite a few thousand collaborators. So, you know, they didn't want to talk about that after the war. And it's only just recently that a few people have put out some books, and I bought a very good book, it was in French, about the Gestapo and the people who collaborated of the Jura region, and it actually had the characters and what they did. It's amazing. Because they got a lot of money for this, and they got even more money if they could get the head of the network, of course, or a chief of the resistance. They got more money for that. And when you're starving, you know, it's very tempting for some people.
Right. True. Wow. For the audience, if there are any questions, please put them on the chat. Jyoti, if you can help me. I have another question or two. We are kind of nearing our end of the session. Yes, there are lots of comments. KATHRYN, people are enjoying it. They're all getting intrigued by the story. Sema, who has actually introduced the two of us, she's also there and enjoying the session very much. Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to pick up your book and read. I am at this moment enjoying the embroiderer. So,
Oh,
and I'm going to go through all your books. But I do want to ask one question. How does it feel to be a bestseller for weeks and weeks? My KATHRYN, you across the continent, this is on the US best-selling list, France, Germany. You've killed it. Wow.
um, well, naturally, I'm thrilled to bits, but I still can't believe it. I just can't believe it.
Yeah.
All I know is when I wrote the book, like with all of them, you put in your heart and soul,
Yes.
and you hope that people will enjoy it. And I have to say thank you to all my followers and the people that have bought it, because I really appreciate it, and they've been wonderful. But I'm still pinching myself and onwards, because I've got more books to write.
Wonderful.
But I am thrilled about it. I'm really thrilled.
Naturally. I'm thrilled to be talking to you, KATHRYN. This is amazing. There is one comment from Professor Ismat Mehdi, who is saying that the story is so intriguing that it will make for a suspense plot for a film. Has that begun to pour in? Because your stories run like a film, they do.
Well, I wish. That's all I can say. I wish.
Okay.
And we live in hope there. We live in hope. But I think because of my background as a designer, I think visually. I think in the scenes, and the words come after. And it's never the other way around. So yeah.
It is a very good
and also there is another thing as well, that, as I said earlier, I absolutely love film noir. So that's also there when I'm thinking of these scenes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, who knows? I mean, we still have, you have a lot of stories coming, and so tell us about that. Tell us about the next works that are in the pipeline. I saw a cover or two of something that's about to be launched.
This next one, which I'm just about to send to my editor, just gone over it to make sure all the pieces connect, is set on an island in the Aegean, and it's set over a short period of about 6 weeks in 1944. And in this one, I seem to alternate between going to Europe to write a story and then writing something set in Greece and Turkey. Because after this, I'll be going back to Vienna again. And so, they're all important and international. But this one, the war is the backdrop, not the main feature, as it is in the Grand Hotel. And it's really about, as I say to people, I'm still working on the back cover blur, but it's almost a cross between Zorba the Greek and the bridges of Madison County, but which might sound, probably won't make sense to you, but there's a lot of village life in this, about a beautiful woman who runs a taverna, and she has a child, and her husband was killed at the beginning of the war, and she has managed to run this taverna alone. And times are very hard for her. And the matchmakers, when village life, you have to put yourself into a village life mentality in this time. The matchmakers don't like a beautiful woman being alone. They wanted to get married or to just turning heads. So they come together to try and find her another husband. But there's a terrible storm happens one night, and a body is washed up in the cove near where the taverna is, and her life completely changes. It's an emotional roller coaster, and probably can't say anymore without I'm giving it away, but it's a bit different to the others. So yes, we're bringing in a lot of the harshness of village life here in the war, where they don't trust anyone, and the jealousies that creep in. Quite a different approach.
Okay, we look forward to that. We really do look forward to that, KATHRYN. Well, it was really wonderful talking to you, KATHRYN. I'm so glad that Sema introduced us and you really accepted to participate in the Hyderabad Literary Festival online session. We are very, very thrilled that you were here. Lots of comments saying that they are all waiting now to catch the book and read it. Thank you so much. This was a delightful conversation, and excellent that you were with us.
Thank you. I'm honored to be asked to speak with you. It's been a pleasure. And I have to say that one day down the track, I will write a story set in India. And I already know that it will be set around partition and there'll be textile families involved. So that's somewhere that will, that is on the cards.
We look forward to that, and so does HLF, you know, so the story has just begun, as I can see. The listeners may want to know that KATHRYN has been to Hyderabad, to India before, and when she says that she has a story rolling in her mind, we know it's rolling right there, and we look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, because I love India. I have some very good Indian friends, and I love the history and the culture and the people. So
lovely. Lovely. Thank you so much, KATHRYN. You know, we have wrapped up and everything, but there is one question that has come up from Ismat Mehdi. Maybe you want to take it. Ismat Mehdi is the feedback from the survivors who may still be alive? Back, I suspect, to the story, to the book. Is there any such interaction that you've had with the survivors of World War? And
I don't know. There's quite an elderly age group that do read this, and they understand the story. So yeah, I would say there's quite a few. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Well, there you go, Ismat, and thank you. A good night to you. Thank you for staying up 1 o'clock and
it's yeah, 1:30.
It's 1:30. Well, have a good night. Thank you so much, and thanks to all the listeners who were with us. Good evening.
Thank you.
Bye, KATHRYN. Bye.
Bye-bye.